Season 5, Episode 10, Stubble, Stash and Mug Mats. To fit or not to fit? This episode discusses a Why Work podcast subscriber's concern on managing the scenario when a bearded worker must wear a mask for their health protection at work. Get better equipment. It's not the easiest mandate in this complex situation, says Count Von Count, aka Trajce. He's expressive while displaying his well-groomed goatee. Alan agrees, recounting reasons why some people find this an emotive issue, cultural, religious, or industrial events. Sara reverts to pop culture movie comparisons in race relations and navigating complex situations through good mediation. Enjoy this episode.
Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. Educate your mind, cause it's...
Hello, and welcome to the Why Work podcast, a series of playful legal dissections on the most curious and alarming events in the world of work. The podcasters Alan Trajce and Sara debate how to craft a better experience of work. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. And remember, none of the things we talk about today should be construed as legal advice or any other type of advice. We're just here to talk about all things related to work.
Okay, what's been happening? Who's been writing to us, Sara?
You know, Trajce, I've had an experience where I've been out conducting a job analysis, just basic design discovery, and empathy mapping and trying to understand about a worker's experience. And I came across a case where somebody who normally paints cylinders was told to hold off, and there wasn't a resolution yet to this person's job because they didn't pass the fit testing with some new masks around their face to protect them from the fumes of the painting, the particles, and they had a beard. Now, we've just had someone write to us. We have a subscriber and a LinkedIn group follower who has written to us and said, we've got workers who do not wish to shave or have different types of shaves for the fit testing by their occupational hygienist. The hygienist, conducted toolbox education on explaining the what, how, why for fit testing as part of worker consultation and engagement. And I'm assuming this was also in the case of industrial painters. But even after learning all the rationale, the underpinning philosophies, the workers refused to shave. So the question is, what are the employer obligations at this point? Because we know beards can be culturally important and of religious significance too.
Obviously, yeah.
And yet you've got an obligation to protect your workers from harm, and they can't comply with the PPE wear that you have available for them. What are your thoughts, Alan?
Yeah, well, look, it's a common problem, and it's one for which there are solutions. Really, that listener or that business has to go and see an employment lawyer and get an approach mapped out on how they're going to deal with it, and there will be a solution. But
pause. I like how you said an approach mapped out, because it's not just black and white.
No,
you're talking about the approach, a consultation approach, an investigative approach, a discovery approach.
We know it's not black and white because of the recent court decision, the Supreme Court appeal, successful appeal. So we know it's not a black and white decision.
Sorry, what was the Supreme Court appeal?
In relation to the anti-vaxxers, or those who did not consent to a mandate to be vaccinated, were stood down in the health. I don't have that case on me.
I'm familiar with that case.
But my point is, that's how we know it's not black and white, because we know it's grey.
And we do, and the principles are, first of all, the safety of the workers is paramount. So that's your top consideration. If it's a work environment where not wearing a mask places the workers' health or safety at risk, then that's just not on. It's not acceptable. So you start from that premise. It's well recognised now that men can be particularly passionate about beards, and so it can be a very emotional thing. And as you pointed out, it can be a religious thing. So it's not as simple as saying just shave off your beard or you lose your job. You really have to map out a process that ensures that everyone is afforded natural justice and that there's fairness, and that if there are any human rights issues considered, that they're considered as well. And it can be quite complex, but there is a solution.
Very complex, because I'm imagining what we spoke about in terms of empathy maps. I can appreciate the employee's experience of saying, well, hang on, get better equipment. This is who I am. You've hired me. Here I am. I'm here to do this job.
Yeah.
Or they may have grown the beard after being employed too.
There is much better equipment, but it's expensive.
Right, okay, but, here I am. Or I can also see the empathy for the employer saying, hang on, I've employed you to do a job. There was an expectation on what this job is. I'm small business, medium enterprise, whatever. And I'm actually trying to do the absolute best I can to protect you from harm and particulate matter, right? I don't want you exposed to these paint particles.
Yeah, the reason why these dilemmas arise is because businesses will be operating, at a level that is acceptable according to government standards and industry standards today, and they might start their employment relationship, but every year the standards are getting higher and higher. And so what can happen is there can be this creep, and then it gets to a point, in this case, where when that person started working with the company, beards might have been acceptable. They may not have even been wearing masks when the person first started with the company, but now it's no longer acceptable, and that creates a dilemma for the business and for the worker in how they can make sure that person is safe and at the same time continue to operate as a business.
It's a continuum. It's a continuum, and things start this way, and then things change, and policies
and the law changes.
Yeah,
the law is constantly changing.
Well, the standards
and the understanding about exposures, hazard exposures, the interaction and the latency of those exposures. It's the same thing we spoke about with my friend and colleague Peg Pennard and the smoking legislation that came into place.
Attitudes.
Right? Attitudes, understanding, scientific evidence, empirical evidence. Go through the list of what we learn, and how we talked about that terminology of leading practice versus best practice, because we know it's continually evolving.
And I think it's important in these types of situations, and you can think of lots of examples. You just said smoking, but you have to tread silicosis. You have to tread carefully, because as the recent case against the police commissioner, Queensland Police Commissioner, demonstrates, is that you have to be respectful of people's human rights, and you have to make sure that you properly address those issues. So in the case of a man who has a beard, who feels that they don't want to lose their beard, you have to be respectful of that and consider all the issues and move forward in a measured and careful fashion.
So let's get granular with this. That means you do not immediately fire the person who refuses to wear the mask.
No.
You don't hold it forever and have them floating as a supernumerary with no purpose, no purpose in the business, right? So
no one wins in that situation.
So go into the medium then. So don't fire. Don't just have them float and do nothing.
Well, there might be alternatives. There might be alternative duties the worker can do. It might be that you need a transitional phase. It might be that the individual worker, for example, if they have a beard for religious reasons, it might be that the importance of that factor justifies getting a special mask for that worker. Sometimes,
are there other paints that you can use? I don't know.
Right. Sometimes workers say, I want to keep my beard and I'm willing to buy my own mask. Now, you'd be hard-pressed if you dismiss that worker when they'd offered to buy their own mask. So it's not a black and white situation.
Wouldn't you also think, though, that you could just buy a mask if there actually was one that worked with that facial hair and passed the fit test?
There's some amazing masks out now, but some really good quality ones, but they're all expensive. The really good ones are very expensive.
Because I imagine somebody has turned his or her mind to the design of a mask to cater for religious reasons or just purely for aesthetic reasons. How can we get this to be compliant but also factor in the beard?
So
they're there. If you go looking, you'll find them.
Can you give me an example of what expensive means? And are they throwaway?
Thousands of dollars.
And how long do they last?
They'll have filters that need to be replaced.
Yeah, but they're masks, they're purpose masks, and with the filters.
So the mask itself will continue to be used.
Well, it wears out. It's just like any piece of equipment. It's got a lifespan.
So one recruitment effort for a new person would be thousands upon thousands of dollars.
Yeah, but if it's small business though, Sarah, that's different. If it's just like a local, like one shop, one commercial.
I get that context matters. I'm just talking generally, like the effort to retrain somebody, to recruit somebody, to retrain somebody, to not go through a legal lawsuit over this, You have to do a little bit of cost benefit and cost effectiveness analysis here.
You also need to look at what the risk is. So depending upon the work, if you're dealing with something that's creating a carcinogen, you might say, well, masks are there's no alternative. Absolutely. You have to wear masks.
There is a third way. If we, for example, if it is about the mask and if it is about the beard, can we negotiate for a goatee?
Says he who is wearing a goatee right now is fashioned with a goatee.
But you know what? People
have you ever been fit tested?
I'll ask ResFit, who we work with, I've aligned with. I'll ask ResFit to try that. And it's funny because people might often go, "Oh, here he is, Trajce just quipping this in," but often, sometimes an icebreaker or short-circuiting a very heated situation through perhaps a sensitive but reasonably humorous remark can actually stop things escalating, in a black and white thing.
Yeah.
So, but who knows? Maybe that person might go, you know what? I could trim my beard. And then there may be a certain cheaper or alternative mask. I'm talking about mediation here, where you're trying to resolve it, where suddenly everyone wins. A cheaper mask, a slightly different beard. But my point is, if you don't have this conversation and this discussion, people are going to get adversarial. They're going to cross their arms. They're going to get lawyered up. And so...
Well, I think this is one of those topics where you do need legal advice.
Yeah.
I think because it's such a complex equation of issues that you do need to, work out how you think you can solve the problem and whether or not legally you can actually do that.
And that's right. And, I'd hate to see, for example, such a valued and such a good worker that things just fall apart because of this person's desire to continue looking the way he does. And wouldn't it be a shame to lose such capital because of an impasse over a beard?
This makes me think of the movie. Do you know the movie The Best of Enemies? I love these. It's an American drama film from 2019, and it's based on a book, The Best of Enemies: Race and Redemption in the New South, focusing on rivalry between civil rights activist Ann Atwater and a Klu Klux Klan leader, C.P. Ellis. Right, so. Phenomenal, where they run charrettes to discuss segregation and other issues, based on how to get better housing conditions, school conditions, and address segregation. So instead of just seeing things in completely black and white, literally, on these race issues, but on issues where people are so stuck in what they believe, which is what you're talking about, is mediating this, and they use these public charrettes to do this.
Yeah, and
this is based on a true story. This Klu Klux Klan leader and this lady, Ann Atwater, became the best of friends in real life for years after, which they would have thought would never have been possible.
Yeah. So, for example, when you say get legal advice, I'm actually extending that to saying get an experienced lawyer to assist in mediating. Yeah, an employment lawyer specifically trained to assist in mediating a response. So having the legal grounding, but using a more dynamic rather than, look, this is how it's going to be. This is your issues.
In this particular topic, it's a very emotional one for some men.
You would have a very absolutely. I mean,
some people will sacrifice their jobs in order to keep their beard.
There's the mythology and the nostalgia too of, for example, Ned Kelly, who actually wore a helmet. But the thing is, so you've got. But my point is, these things matter. The beard matters. I know guys who spend a lot of money getting their beards.
Manicured,
trimmed and coiffed.
A lot of effort,
and very handsome beards, very fetching beards. So these things,
UK word, very fetching.
These things matter. So
sort of thing you'd hear an English lawyer
say. It is. That's what an English lawyer would say. Fetching.
Oh, just prepping for my next English story. I pine for those days. I'm thinking of England. Remember that song? And tell me, is it still raining there in England?
Wouldn't it be great to have an effective resolution? So, like this movie, The Best of Enemies. Lovely. That this in real life, Anne and this this guy, CP, actually went around different cities and became speaking partners to talk about their resolution and how they found a happy medium. And they remained friends right to the end of his life and gave his eulogy at his funeral. Like, this is huge. So if you find a really skilled mediator and somebody able to draw out those different points of view and solve problems together, because that's the heart of adult learning.
That's it. And don't stop at
shared problem solving.
And don't stop at beards. I'd like to see moustaches. Those really curly ones. Look, you know what? I've got a goatee. I'm the third way. I could perhaps mediate a response. And it would be a shame to lose a very good and experienced worker over
some facial hair.
Facial hair.
And you also mentioned a couple other issues, because we've been touching on the fact that multiple laws could apply when a situation is tested, a real-world scenario is tested. So you've talked about employment law, work health safety law, human rights law. In the US, we would talk about civil rights laws, So you also mentioned overruling an appeal and the pandemic, and I heard
the Supreme Court decision with the health care workers. Remember
in Australia
recently in Queensland there was the nursing decision, which we'll get and perhaps dedicate an entire episode.
Quick overview.
That case involved during at the height of the pandemic and the directives being issued for for vaccinations, and these workers, gainfully employed workers, very experienced healthcare workers, were stood down, and some were still stood down pending the decision. And of course now it was deemed that the way in which that mandate was rolled out,
there wasn't proper consultation.
Yes,
so it was based on process, not ethics, not ontology, but process. Okay.
It was the process. It was the procedural aspect of it, indeed,
which is very important for businesses. So you might have come to the right answer, but you've come to that answer the wrong way.
Yes. So you've got the means and the ends. It's the means and the way in which it was rolled out.
So I'm always championing the appointment of a chief work design strategist and design counsel in businesses, but I have equally had a very open mind and receptivity to the idea of having lawyers involved in consultation, in senior advisory roles, beyond things like contract law.
Beyond in-house lawyer, traditional in-house lawyers.
But
beyond that.
But brought into work strategy, whereas too often I see if they exist, they're just fashioned over here at arm's length to look at contract law or something procedural like that. Instead of strategy and advising on the strategy of both ethics, underpinning rationale, and on process, and working together like we are in this podcast with work design strategists. And sure, there will be tensions because somebody wants to talk all risk and compliance and this person over here wants to talk innovation. But those tensions help mediate a more robust path forward.
So you've got thesis, antithesis, create synthesis. Karl Marx.
Back to sociopolitics.
Educate your mind, because the system keep you blind.
They're not new concepts. It's just a shame that in this fast-paced neoliberal world, nobody wants to sit down and sort of question why are we doing it like this. Let's break it down.
And the other case you mentioned briefly was this work-from-home win for an Aussie dad who was ordered back to the office. Queensland Public Service won his fight to be able to work from home after arguing it would have been better for his health and well-being. However, what's ironic is he'd already resigned, but the fight pursued, right? He was just fed up with the process. But he was in the Corporate Services Division of Queensland Health.
Yes.
And he applied in 2021 to work from home, work completely from home.
Yeah, I'm not on top of that case. Do you know about that?
It's media. Media is what we've got access to.
Right.
I thought you were referring to there was a Australian Federal Police officer who wanted to work from home. That decision, which I don't have a copy of, has been delivered.
Let's come back to that one.
But the point being, human rights issues often prevail, and what was considered in one case...
What to me it means, getting back to your original phrase before, the zeitgeist.
The zeitgeist.
No, that's American zeitgeist.
Zeitgeist.
Getting back to that and the spirit of the times.
Yes.
And right now, right this moment, human rights is
it's big.
Big thing. So, Sarah, it's interesting if we were having this discussion 5 years ago or fast forward 5 years, but no, the time and place in terms of space is that human rights is starting to, it's almost like symbiosis or osmosis. Yeah, or symbiosis, I suppose, or osmosis, or diffusion. I don't know, but it's penetrating. It's making its way into, and ever since we've had such a huge interest in the psychosocial space, the psychological injury. So we're now finding all of these, which were once just simply seen as adjuncts or just add-ons, anti-discrimination, which used to just reside in its own anti-discrimination universe. Now that's being embedded. Sexual harassment, it's all being embedded into work health and safety, legal pedagogy.
Industrial relations commissions are now
beyond, straight into WHS. So they're coming out of just ordinary, say, fair work or industrial principles, but they're being embedded into potentially criminal offences.
Correct. But I'm saying it's coming through these pathways of what starts with an Industrial Relations Commission inquiry, and then more is being woven into this in very complex ways.
That's a great word. Yeah, more is being woven in.
Although I think we need to say that at the time of recording this, it's March 2024, and there could be an appeal, and it could change the law by the time we go to air.
We should say yes, Captain Blog.
Well, I will say what the media says. The Fair Work Commission is looking at whether it should be a legal entitlement to work from home. So this is under review right now.
Yeah, there you go.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's all because of COVID. You know, we were all sent home, and it just changed the whole work environment.
Yeah, so the COVID. So whilst we don't talk about how many COVID cases, it's just not in the media anymore. COVID's still here in an abstract sense, isn't it?
Yes.
COVID is here physically.
Well, in a real sense,
it is too. But we don't really. It doesn't get the media. What's getting the media attention is working from home, post-COVID appeals, and so COVID is really embedded into our psyche. It's the zeitgeist, mate.
Educate your mind, 'cause the system will keep you blind.
Hey, Trajce, we've been debating a lot about incident investigation tools, and part of that came up from some queries I had from clients about accident causation models. And you and I have been now writing a journal paper about this, because fundamentally what we've been talking about is that it's not about whether one tool is better or worse than another. It's simply part of your instrumentation. Any tool that you use, it's one of many resources when you go about an investigative process.
That's right. Sometimes it struck me, and Alan, I want to hear your thoughts about this as well. An incident occurs, investigation tools used in the private sector.
In your workplace.
Yeah, and it always struck me as to why people would choose a certain tool over another. And I'd sometimes ask them, so why are you using the bow tie? Or why are you using fishbone? Or why are you using ICAM? Oh, it's just because. It's
on trend, right? It's an on-trend phenomenon. They heard somebody else using it. It's advertised in their local health and safety association. There's a training workshop happening. They jump in and suddenly they adhere themselves, meaning an organization, might adhere themselves to a single tool or method.
Yeah, so whether it's marketing, whether the sales rep was particularly effective in one proprietary tool over another, but I never would get a straight answer, I wouldn't get an answer firmly grounded or scientifically as to why that tool's used. It was just the status quo. Oh, well, just because we use that tool, because also everyone else uses that tool, for example, in the mining industry or automotive industry. And so this is where the idea originally started. No one could, certainly with any degree of conviction, explain to me they use this tool because just an accepted device.
What I've seen in practice is people they might have a because answer, but in my mind the answer should be, this is the outcome we're looking for, this is the direction we're going in, how is this tool going to help us in getting to that end result? All those different investigative tools work in different ways, and some of them are not ideal in all applications.
Bingo. And what Trajce and I have been debating is that there's different jurisdictions. There's also different purposes when conducting an investigation. And I'll pause on that for a moment, because to me that's the heart of work design, is before debating a method or examining a control intervention, a strategy, start first with what's your purpose? What are you doing this for? Are you doing this for legislative compliance? And if that's the case, is less best, where you don't disclose too many of your vulnerabilities, right? Bear with me. If your purpose is to learn from this and prevent something from recurring, then maybe you'd best make sure that you've got a very broad socio-technical perspective on what's been happening in a work system, and you are not too narrow in your view, right? Or you might say, we really want to learn and grow from this and communicate our message to many people at scale in our organization, in which case that says to me, you start looking at strategies for really easy, relatable, visual communication, storytelling, something that's interactive, agile in a system. And I work with tech companies that can do that. But too often, there's these assumptions that you run with in a company, that people run with, that it's just a matter of course that we must do an investigation. And then there's something trendy. Hey, let's run a learning team. Well, what was the purpose, first of all, for doing the investigation? Is it just regulatory compliance? Or where are you going with it? Because the strategies that you choose depend on that, what I would call design philosophy, your concepts and your strategies. Holding on to one tool and debating one tool over another will likely be a colossal waste of time.
Yeah, the proverbial, use a full top-of-the-range investigation tool, I won't plug any specifically, to essentially investigate something so minor. So, using the proverbial sledgehammer to smash open a macadamia nut. You've got this complex system for effectively, it was a minor slip, trip and fall type scenario.
It didn't require that. But for other things like a fatality, a disablement, or when there's major capital losses, and you want to really dig into this, and there's ramifications to your reputational harm, etc., right? You absolutely want to dig into this in a more systematic way. But too often, you get a corporate head office saying, this is the tool we use, this method will be applied, blanket. Right? Blanket.
Yeah, and that, I guess that smoke signal isn't necessarily the best or the most efficient way in which to conduct that investigation. So so this is sort of where the research commenced. I was just curious as to why, when you look at cross-jurisdictionally, you will have, for example, some piece of legislation use the word to define an event, they'll use the word accident. And I know people often interchange accident and incident. Crikey, it happens in ISO 45001. I always found it curious, if you're using a certain tool which commences with the word incident, and that term incident isn't defined in that relevant jurisdiction, then before we pass go, can we at least find out that we're using the correct nomenclature or the correct taxonomy for that particular investigation? And it might prompt someone to go, you know what, why are we using this tool when perhaps we should be using something else or a complement of both? So, in other
multiple tools, many strings in your bow as instrumentation, and that perspective, Trajce, is one perspective around legal compliance, regulatory compliance, which I can understand with your prosecutorial hat is incredibly important. And when we wrote our article, we talked about tools that were sequential, that just tell you sort of a timeline of an event, tools that prompt epistemological, kind of the way you think around things with probabilistic considerations, and we also relayed some information on tools that have a socio-technical systems approach. And we went back to go, okay, this is really complex kind of stuff. What happened? What are we talking about in a simple analysis? And we looked at road accidents, right? Something that, most of the time, even in circumstances that are confronting, like somebody speeding next to you, somebody aggressive to you, inclement weather, that kind of thing, you still get home. You still modulate and regulate that system of driving, the brakes that you use, the way you swerve. You get home okay. And that's sort of talking about the rhythms of road safety. And yet, when you look at when there is an accident in road safety, most of the time it's trying to blame a driver or drivers, and there's that blame orientation. And the human factors research shows that 60% of the time, other factors were involved in a social system, a socio-technical system, that are never counted in core accusations, legal frameworks for the blame
That's
on a road
interesting.
accident.
So can you give an example? Follow on from your driving in the wet situation, give an example of that.
Yeah, so it could have been something technical. You talk about causational chains of responsibility, right?
Well,
you talk about that a lot. So the
indeed.
way that the brakes work and the way that maybe the dash and the panel have been aligned, are they familiar to the operator when a new car is released? Because that lack of familiarity could cause you to hesitate and pause and have to think with a conscious brain rather than a habitual brain, and that slows down your response time, right?
Yeah, so
There could
it's
be-
really what we're trying to establish is proximate cause. It's just what we're saying is what was that proximate nexus. So these can give a broad spectrum, a range of causes, but what's that proximate cause? And it may not have been captured in that blame game. A socio-technical system expands the understanding of what went wrong proximate to the incident.
So if that's actually what you're trying to do, if you're actually trying to prevent recurrence, which we often hear people say, then you've got to have a very broad perspective. If your goal is quick blame, well, sure, you can have a quick sequential analysis and just label it and walk away from it, right? Or if you need to defend a case, you might not want to disclose all the system vulnerabilities. Of course, from a human factors perspective, I'm often really intrigued by all the system vulnerabilities, but I've walked into meetings where I've said to engineering groups, and they're about to hand over an asset, to a business operation, said, oh my gosh, look, check this out. I've just investigated all this and I found 22 more vulnerabilities that you guys haven't disclosed. Isn't that awesome? And the whole room goes quiet, like crickets, because basically that was not within your scope. Don't look further. Whoops.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really, the upshot is, and a new sexy term is a nuanced approach.
Nuanced approach.
Yeah, that's right.
Comprehensive and nuanced,
Yeah, looking for that's beyond, it's just the status quo. Everyone uses this.
Which means the person, the environment, the tasks, the organization of that work, the purpose of what was happening.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. In my lifetime, I followed the wrong.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Why Work. You've been listening to Trajce, Sara and Alan. And if you'd like to know more about some of the things we've talked about today, please subscribe, and we'd be more than happy to provide you with information, names of cases, and other things that may interest you. Please be aware that none of the matters we've talked about today should be construed as legal advice or any other type of advice. We're just here to talk about all things related to work. See you next time.
Baker, all my life, an authority hater. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system